This is an idea that we have to invite some of our board members, in this case, Stephen Song. He's the first one, he's the inaugural of this one, and it will not be the last one. And it has a multi-agenda idea behind. One is, first and foremost, is for the whole community to engage and to get to know some of our board members, which they play a crucial role in the school. But also to listen different ideas and trajectories and professional life and professional constructions of careers that they come from different angles, and each of them have a different story to tell, what they came involved with SCI-Arc and how they relate to architecture. Stephen is a very multifaceted person. So part of that is also to share with our students and our faculty different views about that, and how to start to understand the relation between business, commerce, creativity, and all these things. So Stephen is an architect. Stephen Song is an architect by training, but also he is a real estate investor. He's a founding principal of the firm SCAAA. But also he is the CEO of Axel companies, which is a family office who invests in real estate and food companies. So he's also part of the board of the Hammer. But other things that may be also very surprising, also Stephen has a theoretical work that he's been developing over the years. He wrote a book together with Sun Young Park, Shifting Paradigms, Renovating the Decorated Shed, that explore and discuss the work of Venturi and Scott Brown, who were people that Stephen worked closely and he considered his mentor. So Stephen's career and how he operates in the world has many, many angles. And I think to me is one of the things that it makes it so exciting to listen to him, to talk to all of us. And as I said, part of this is to be a fairly informal forum. So hopefully we'll have time for all of you to ask questions and engage in a conversation. So Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's a pleasure to have you on the board. It's a pleasure to have you as a friend and supporter of SCI-Arc. And it's a pleasure to have you today as a speaker. So Stephen, the screen is all yours.
Well, the pleasure is all mine. Well, thank you everyone for having me here. And thank you, Hernán, for the kind introduction and invitation. When Hernán asked me last year to speak to the students, the world was at the height of the pandemic. And I immediately said yes, because, well, he's Hernán and it's SCI-Arc. And the board members can really only say yes when we're asked to do stuff. But I was confused, and secretly I began to wonder why me and why now. And after some time, I could think of two possible explanations. It was either that he's already asked everybody around him twice, and we're running out of people that could be put on Zoom, where students are known to pay undivided attention for hours and hours, especially right after lunch on a Friday, or potentially because he knew I had an unusual career path and thought I would have some weird stories to tell. Well, looking back, I did walk an unusual path, and I'm still walking it. As Hernán said in my introduction, I'm now an architect, an investor in real estate, food companies, vegan food companies, and tech companies, a black belt in Taekwondo, and I sit on the boards of a museum, a university, and a global health organization. When you say it like that, it sounds like a career description of someone with multiple personality syndrome or some sort of compensation issues, but trust me, it's all towards one goal. A goal based on this romantic image of an architect that I had as a young student around your age. Well, except Taekwondo, obviously I just made that up so you don't think I'm old and I'm cool. And I learned through copying my teachers, growth via assimilation is a valid way to learn. And in doing so, I'm taking his title a bit out of context, but it is a story of someone who's been given. But it all started, like so many things in life, with an embarrassing email. After my freshman year in this architecture school at Carnegie Mellon University, or the Caltech of the East, as called by nobody. After my freshman year, I wanted to leave architecture. See, back then, half of the incoming students, architecture students, chose it as their major because their parents told them that they were Lego geniuses, and the other half because they read Ayn Rand's book, The Fountainhead, and found Howard Roark, an intransigent young architect who battles against conventional standards and refuses to compromise with an architectural establishment unwilling to accept innovation. I was part of this latter group. I mean, obviously that's a gross generalization, but I was part of this latter group, but I read the book a little bit differently. I was not inspired by Roark alone. I was more interested in the possibility of what all the characters in the book, well, most of the characters in the book could have achieved if they found a way to work together. You would have to know the book to know what I mean, but my romantic image of an architect, you could say, was closer to that of the Renaissance builder or the master builder with total project accountability. I didn't really know what that meant, and I'm still trying to define it in today's time through practice, but I knew what it felt like being in the program, that I felt like I was in a bubble, detached from the world and its advancements, drawing on my Mylar, staying up all night just to be judged by other architects the next day based on their own views of what's right and wrong. In sum, I think now I can say that the program or the studio felt very insular. But before I left, I spoke with my favorite professor, Arthur Lubetz, a cranky old man who walked around with a cane and actually kicked me in the head one day as I was still napping on the studio desk when it was time for class. But you know, back then that was okay because it was 100 years ago and times were different. Anyway, Art told me to speak with other architects who were already practicing and quote unquote successful, and see what they thought of the hesitations I had before I made the jump. So being a freshman kid who was walking the fine line between bravery and stupidity, I wrote a long email to every Pritzker Prize winner whose office email address I could look up on yahoo.com. No one wrote back. Well, some of them because they were already dead and I just didn't know, which was quite embarrassing. Except this one old couple in Philadelphia. Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown wrote back. Bob and Denise, as I now call them very fondly, said in their response, "Stephen, we like your questions. Those are the right questions to be asking at your age. We have answers, but we're not going to give them to you because, well, we're old and they're our answers and they don't apply to you or your generation. But you could come and live with us, work for us, and see what you can find here." So I spent the summer and the following fall semester in the suburb of Philadelphia in their house. What I didn't know was that I was really signing up to be their handy person. So I mopped their floors, did their dishes, cooked for them once, then was asked to never do that again, got their coats dry cleaned and single-handedly mulched their multi-acre backyard when I didn't know what mulching was. But again, that was okay. It was 100 years ago and I was paid fairly. They didn't believe in free or labor or free internships, and to this day, I don't either. Anyway, one day about 3 weeks in, Bob came to me and said, "Stephen, we need extra hands in the office. You just finished your freshman year, so you're kind of useless, but just come in." So I said, "Okay, see you there at 9 a.m. And he said, "No, finish the housework first, then start in the office in the afternoon." To that, I don't really remember what I said exactly, but I think it was probably something like, "Huh?" But what he said to me next, I'll never forget because, well, also because he said the same thing to me 2 more times before he passed away 3 years ago while I was away on a business trip. And Bob said, Stephen, we're almost 80 years old and we work 8 days a week. You can do this. So for the next months, I did the housework in the morning, then went into their office and worked until late every day. On many evenings, it would just be Bob, Denise, and me in the office working on Tsinghua University campus plan or building at Brown. On other nights, they were working on their final book together, Architecture as Science and Systems, 30-something years after learning from Las Vegas, or what they called their living will for the next generation. And I read their manuscript to give them feedback as much as possible as a useless freshman kid, trying to be a voice of the next generation. On those days when we were alone, they told me stories. Bob told me why he wrote his first book, Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture. He said, as an architect, you write when you don't have any projects to work on. He also said that the book, after being written, provided a theoretical basis he could return to in the later years. He said, we built our ideas on the discourse of the generations before us. You can go forward by looking back. Then he asked, what will you contribute to the discourse? Denise pointed me towards Hannah Arendt and warned me against rushed judgment. She said, you juggle all the information in the air as long as you can until they start to fall into places. But the way they land, you may not like it. It might even be ugly, but you know that's the right plan. One evening, they told me that they regret not being able to do a lot of work with developers. They said, Stephen, if you want to become a modern Renaissance builder, you need to learn the language of developers. You see, the most coveted projects of our time may not be Florentine churches. They might just be urban mixed-use high-rise developments, and those are built for specific reasons by developers. And if you knew their language, you can elegantly add and expand beyond their initial objectives, which tend to be mostly financially driven. Another evening, Denise said that architects need to leave the site better than we found it, but defining what's better is the essence of the task. Sometimes it's better to not build anything, and knowing that is really, really hard. She also urged that we should be careful not to build for the technology itself, although it does fascinate us to do so, exactly that, but rather take a step back and understand the changes in our lives that come from the technology than build for the people living among them. Denise also told me that she's very much enjoyed the position of a forever outsider. She was not referring to the whites versus the grays days of the late 60s and the 70s. She said they actually never called themselves as the grays. It was the people who called themselves as the whites that labeled Bob and Denise as the grays. In any case, she was referring to her life. An immigrant her whole life, she moved from South Africa to London, then to the US. She said, when you're caught at the center of it, it's hard for you to see the whole picture clearly. Standing on the edge of it and looking in, sometimes you get a better idea of the whole. So when it was time for me to leave their home, I still didn't have all the answers, but I saw and heard enough to choose to stay in architecture and knew at least where to look to seek the answers I need to become the architect that I like to be. And there were at least 7 things that I needed to learn. One, how to actually put together a building, not only from an architect's point of view, but also from the client's. I wanted to learn the language of development. 2, expand and build my theoretical basis in the larger ongoing discourse in architecture and art, so I can perhaps one day participate in it. 3, I needed to learn how to manage a business because I knew I wanted to have my own practice someday. 4, I needed to know more about the world outside of my profession and circle, especially the industries that shape the way we live now. 5, I needed to build a team to do all to do all these things because architecture, after all, is a partnership effort. The 6, strengthen my international connections so I can be here and there and be comfortable standing on the edge. 7, have a social purpose in my doing and making. So what I saw was a meandering path, but a path nonetheless. And like many good things in life, like true love, this would actually take time. When I graduated from Carnegie Mellon, I applied to what I thought at that time to be the most commercial corporate firms who did a lot of work with big developers. See, these companies may not always have the alluring geniuses, but they have over time developed a genius system that can produce quality buildings over and over. And there's something really important to be said about the consistency of quality in work, especially from the client's point of view. That's reliability. So I spent a few years at firms like SOM, and finally, when I felt like I knew how to put together a staircase and rubbed enough shoulders with very smart people in the real estate development world, I went and got my master's degree. I went to University of Pennsylvania, otherwise known as the SCI-Arc of the East, by nobody. But I chose Penn mostly for 3 reasons. 1, because of Wharton, the business school, which had some of the best real estate development classes I could sneak into, but also because of Professor David Leatherbarrow, who headed the PhD department at Penn. David was primarily known for his contributions to the field of architectural phenomenology, and in a way represented a way of thinking about architecture that was so radically different from that of Bob and Denise. But I needed that balance. I asked him to let me take PhD level theory classes, and he did, although he knew of my background and he had his differences with Bob and Denise in the past. And I was actually told that he might have been responsible for firing Stephen Eisner, an old partner of Bob and Denise from Penn's faculty many, many years ago. Anyway, the amount of reading I had to do at Penn in David's classes was extreme and the discussions intense, but I felt it was enough to balance and develop my own argument in architecture, because until that time I was seeing it mostly through the philosophical lens that I really borrowed from Bob and Denise. Towards the end of my years at Penn, I felt that it was the right time to write my thoughts down into an essay, because I still had no real work or my firm. So I did that and then sent it to Paul Petrunia, and he was happy to put it on his little website that he had called the Architect. And the essay is called Architecture and the Givenness, which my architecture firm is revisiting these days for something that I'll talk about at the very end of this hour. Lastly, I chose Penn because it is in Philadelphia. And by that time, Bob and Denise had really become what Denise called my architectural grandparents. And given the fact that I was moving up to Los Angeles afterwards, and their very old age, I knew I wouldn't be able to see them as often as I did before, and perhaps not even for as long as I always hoped I would. I moved up to Los Angeles because, well, it's my birthplace, but also because I always felt like Los Angeles is just as much a part of the Pacific Rim culture as it is of the US. And having grown up in the Northeast Asia, as well as the Southeast Asia, if I were to pick a place to be here and there, this was where I would start. This is also where I would mention my partnership at home, not only because she may be watching this, but because it's true. My wife, Jiwon, or as Bob called her, Stephen's much better half, and I work together. And when we're dating back in New York, she was already the youngest director of Star Hotels, overseeing all the W hotels in revenue management. A graduate from the Cornell Hotel School, she knew the ins and outs of hospitality property management. We got married in 2008, right before then during the financial crisis. And at that moment, as we were charting our next life together, we knew a couple of things. One, both of us knew something about real estate investment and management. And two, the market was going to bottom out and bounce back because it's been a cycle. And given that the crisis started with mortgages, the real estate market was definitely going to be affected. And around this time, I kind of invited myself and tagged along a developer friend who had a meeting with Portman Holdings in Atlanta and met John Portsman's team. What I thought of their design or how environmentally unfriendly some of their buildings are aside, I was curious about their business model, where they have both an architectural practice and a real estate firm that often collaborate, but with enough separation between the two for each to have an identity in the world. And after the visit, I could see a modified version of that possibly working for us. So we went and raised money from our families and friends. By this time, Chiwon and I also had real estate friends from our New York days and started buying properties at discounts. But not just any property. We searched for distressed assets that we felt confident that we could reposition either by renovation, but not just upgrades and finishes, but deeper repositions based on contextual research. Or two, better operation, because these were our academic and professional training. At the same time, I started my architecture firm, now known as SCAAA or SCAAA, and our first projects were commissioned by ourselves, and we built a team around them. After a series of successful buying, repositioning, selling, buying something else, and then repositioning again, and then eventually going into the early tech and vegan food company venture investments, we found ourselves at a place where we had a system similar to that of John Portman's design and holdings companies, with an expanded contact list with people in various industries who kept us informed of what was going on outside the design world, and sometimes granted access to smart investment opportunities in those fields that are really far away from our comfort zone. So this is a very crude diagram that I just put together for you guys today. And we're still working on this, but it shows the basic system and relationships among and around the three companies I started. Axel Capital, which is the company we use to invest in real estate projects, commissions SCAAA, the architecture firm, which in return provides architectural services to Axel Capital, and with relative financial autonomy, can afford to the kind and depth of research that other design firms may not be able to, which in turn helps us do better work for Axel as well as outside clients. Axel Capital also provided the initial funding to Axel Impact Investment, which participates in early stage investment rounds of startups in the tech and vegan food industries. And this exposure informs SCAAA and Axel Capital of what's going on in the world, which then assists our decision-making. A big portion of our profit is used to support nonprofit institutions like the Hammer, SCI-Arc, or the Clinton Health. We have specific reasons in supporting these institutions, and they are heavily but non-apologetically biased by what we believe in. We contribute to the institutions that we trust help make the world less divided, more educated, healthier, and more just. I will neither confirm nor deny that our beliefs in these missions of these institutions became stronger through the term of our last president. Like I said, it is a big portion of our profit, and sometimes it feels like I work for these institutions because they just give you so much work to do on these boards. But being really involved also means becoming colleagues and friends with very wise, successful, and who we think are wonderful people who believe in similar missions. Most of them are a lot more experienced and generally older than me, some much older than me. But if you remember, I'm surprisingly adorable to older people. And I think they like that I work hard on these boards. So the institutions you support support you back in so many ways. We meet people through these places that end up becoming our investors and clients for SCA, and we learn so much from them that inform the way we work and live. And those contacts sometimes give us access to the investment opportunities in the venture capital world, where access is really everything. Axel Impact, a firm through which we make these venture capital investments, is what we call a mission-driven investment vehicle, or a socially responsible investing, or ESG investing. Sustainability and societal impact are important measures for us in making our investment decisions. And because this is where the smartest minds of the world are looking right now, the knowledge and the macro world insight we get from being involved in these efforts is immense and helps us stay out of the bubble and stay current with what's going on outside of our architecture studio, and continues to teach us what it means to leave a place better than we found it. So although we're still building this machine and we're nowhere really close to where I want us to be at, I believe SCA, with this setup, is better informed of the changes in the world with an ability to judge what is right and wrong, has the financial capacity to invest in the really, really deep research we can base our design decisions on, but not all clients want to pay a young firm for. SCA has more channels and access to interesting projects and great clients, and works with knowledge and deeper understanding of the financial viability of our projects. And because of all this, I can say with conviction that we can have more and more control and accountability in our work, as I always wanted to, and in my own definition as a modern version of master builder. And now we're connecting the dots in the Pacific Rim. We set up our first branch office in Seoul, Korea, that is run and managed currently by our principal, Young-Hwan Choi, and his wife, Leah. And in doing so, with our knowledge in property management and based on the research book that we keep building on workplaces, and knowing very well what typical co-working spaces like WeWork lack in accommodating design professionals like us, we created what we thought would be the ideal dream workplace for designers of all kinds, but most importantly for us. But we share similar cycle in creating work and have commonly denominating space requirements. And then we run it as a co-working space on 4 floors of a building in Seoul on the name Building Blocks. And it was featured by TEDx Seoul, and it is quite popular. So SCA Korea, we can only use a small portion of it. Right before COVID started, we set up our second branch office in Osaka, Japan, in partnership with one of the oldest home builders in the Kansai area. And we look forward to coming up with the right business model for it as well, but we'll just have to see how things pan out there. With COVID, as other firms may have experienced, our project flow slowed down significantly too. But just then, SCA was invited by the European Cultural Center to exhibit at the Time Space Existence show, which is a collateral event of the Venice Biennale Architectural. And we have actually one of your alumni, Rachele Scipione, working on it together with Robert Aitchison, one of our principals and a longtime friend of mine from the New York days. It's the same event where Denise showed her collection of photography work called Wayward Eye in 2016. And we'll actually be using the same room that she used because Denise said in her own words, it would be cute if we did. We thought since our projects have slowed down, this is when we can write. And what we saw around us was a divided nation where the pandemic really acted as an accelerator to the surfacing of the social issues that were embedded and hidden among us, sometimes showing up in the form of violence. And we felt like we had something to say about that. The categorization of people is the overlooked beginning of all agony in human history. And although it's not exactly the same thing, was one of the reasons why I had an allergic reaction and almost left the architecture school when I felt the obsession of labeling architects and architectural styles under so many isms. It's true that these serious social issues have roots in the history of the nation and accidentally or intentionally augmented mainly by policies. But if the built environment or the way our American cities were initially laid out so particularly had any contribution in making our society just a little bit more prone to exclusion and division, perhaps as architects and planners, we can suggest a physical counterform, a kind of social plastics at our exhibition in Venice. And this, first mentioned in the essay I wrote at Penn, would be our updated contribution and participation in the discourse today. An argument that the orientation towards the truth in architecture is toward an understanding of what it means to be in the world in harmony with others, and toward a difficult whole through inclusion rather than an easy unity through exclusion, to borrow Bob's words. So this is where we are today. And thank you for listening to the meandering story about a meandering path of a lost boy. But these are my answers to the questions I had when I was in school about becoming an architect. And now I'm no longer a 20-year-old and maybe just slightly more useful than I was back then. My answers may not apply to you, but perhaps in seeing how I'm approaching the work, you can formulate your own answers to the specific and inherent difficulties that we have in our profession. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Stephen, on behalf of SCI-Arc and everybody here for taking the time. This was fantastic. And as I said, this is the first one of many that we will have coming. To expand the possibilities of conversation, I think these are important issues for everybody to hear, to start to think about that there are multiple ways how to force your career, your future, your path. So this has been fantastic. And again, thank you for being the first one. When you mentioned it was the second option, it was not, we really want you to be the one starting with this. But I think it's important for us to keep thinking and reflecting and talking about these things. And you touch on a lot of subjects that are absolutely current, and then we need to keep developing and finding ways for all of us to intersect and how to operate in the world. So, Stephen, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.